All right, technicalities. Well, anyway, good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Engaging State Government in a Global Pandemic. What a thing. I am Daphne Larkin, the Director of Media Relations and Community Affairs at Norwich University, and I serve on the Board of Directors at the Central Vermont Chamber of Commerce and as the Vice Chair of the Public Policy Committee. It is a privilege to serve in these roles. This is an annual program that we offer to our members, and with everything being virtual now, it was easy to open it up to the general public, so we're really happy to do that. There are 35 chambers of commerce in Vermont, and the Central Vermont Chamber has about 300 members that we serve. Each local chamber serves the needs of its local business members. We know that the pandemic has stressed every sector, and that on top of figuring out how to maintain business, many of you are also trying to figure out how to save your businesses or pivot how you operate to remain relevant. And certainly we know that firsthand, both at the Chamber and at Norwich University. So on top of the usual work of the legislature in crafting laws that impact how we operate, this year, lawmakers are also very busy doling out federal dollars to various different sectors and recipients, as you all know. We do our best to keep you informed of those opportunities. And you have a voice. We are lucky to live in a democracy, and the foundation of a democracy is citizen involvement in our own governing. I heard this recently and it bears repeating. In a democracy, we do not know the outcome of an election, but we can have faith in the process. That is the opposite of living in an autocracy where the outcome is certain and the process unclear. This excellent process of democracy requires participation. We are lucky to live in Vermont, where becoming involved in government is often simply a matter of paying attention and speaking up when you have a question or a concern. Governing begins with town fire districts and road crews, municipalities, downtowns, and cities, and leads directly to those at the very highest levels of state governance and beyond. At the Chamber, we're always discussing how we can serve our members, and this program, in which we illuminate the inner workings of the State House and timely legislation, is one way that we can do that for you. We are grateful to our presenters, folks with deep knowledge and experience in how to make sure that your concerns are being considered in the process of lawmaking. I will introduce each one. They will present for up to 10 minutes or so. And then if there are pressing questions, we can address them then, or we can address all questions at the conclusion of the final presenter. Please write your questions in the chat section, and we will address them as we are able. And now, without further ado, please welcome Patty Komlin, a former state legislator who now puts that deep knowledge to practice on behalf of clients at Downs Rachlin Martin. Patty is going to give us her take on how things will look politically under the Golden Dome with the 2020 Vermont election. Voters decide. Patty?
Nice to see so many people I ordinarily would bump into on the street, like Robert and Matt and Scott and Lucy. I miss everybody, but it's nice to see you here. Let's see if I'm going to share my screen here. Hold on, I'm going to try for a full screen. I may not get there. I'm just going to do this like here. Okay, so a rundown of the election. I thought before we started with numbers, I would talk about the turnout, which was pretty incredible in Vermont. I compared 2018 to 2020, and you can see we're up a little in registered voters, but for total votes cast was pretty significant. In 2018, 57% of voters, registered voters, showed up to vote. This year it was 73%. Of absentees in 2018, 26% of those votes cast were absentee. I think a lot of this because of our mail-in voting law that passed this past year. Almost 76% of the votes cast were absentee. You can see down here, Biden won huge, as everybody is well aware. Trump with 30% of the vote, second only to DC, who Trump landed a whopping 5.5% of the vote. Massachusetts came in right after us, where Trump garnered 34%. So it would appear that we're continue to be a very blue state when you're looking at those numbers, but we still retain an independent streak. Governor Scott had a 40% margin over David Zuckerman, which was the largest in at least 30 years. While it would appear that COVID-19 was the only election issue, and I'm sure it was of great consternation to Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman that the governor had his, twice a week press conference, which many people tune into, and it was frustrating to David, I know. But also, I think the governor voted on some significantly fairly liberal things that David Zuckerman couldn't kind of go after the governor on. There was guns, there was a marijuana bill, there was an abortion bill. All of those things the governor either voted, supported or didn't try to veto. A couple of things he did veto that were more liberal initiatives, like paid family leave and the Global Warming Solutions Act. He didn't prevail. Well, paid family leave he did, but Global Warming Solutions he did not. But that wasn't enough for Zuckerman to really make any inroads in there. I also think there's a lot of the more establishment Democrats get frustrated that David Zuckerman is actually a progressive. And that frustrates a lot of people that the progressives that have kind of made their inroads, they've infiltrated the party as PDs, they call them. And I think there's a lot of people that recognize that pay attention, that just, they object to that. So Phil Scott won handily. There were major leadership changes. David Zuckerman, Molly Gray now took the lieutenant governor's seat. Tim Ashe lost that race. And then Mitzi Johnson, surprisingly, she always runs a close race. But this year it was surprising, I think, that people thought with so many people coming out to vote in the presidential election, people like Mitzi would have been safer than she was. And so the Republicans really did experience what I was calling a Trump bump. If you look at the numbers here, it would seem like it's relatively minor, right? If you look over the Senate column here, Democrats picked up one seat. I'm sorry, the Republicans picked up one seat. If you look over to the House, what it did was it switched. The Democrats lost 3 seats, the Republicans gained 3, the progressive number, and the independents stayed the same. So it did indeed. I can't explain it. I would love somebody in this conversation to give me their theory on how the Republicans were did very well, considering when you look at the numbers for Biden. I took a snapshot over the last few years, the last 3 elections, so you could see where the Democrats were were picking up seats, Republicans were losing them, and it popped up. It doesn't seem that big a number, the 3, but it is when you consider the veto vote. To override the veto, and I double checked with Bill Driscoll to make sure I was right. I get confused by this every time. Democrats would need 2/3 of those present to override a veto. That's 100 votes. So if you add up their 92, and then you add 7 progressives, they're just at 100. So it tells you that there's a couple of moderate Democrats left. They lost some, but the independents are going to be in play, as are those moderate Democrats. At the governor's in a little bit of a stronger position for a veto. So leadership changes in the House with Mitzi gone. Jill Krowinski is the presumptive nominee, the speaker. She is the nominee. Becca Balint in the Senate. And then the leadership in the majority leader is Emily Long in the House. The minority leader in the House is Patty McCoy, expected to be. I think she was just voted in. And in the Senate, the majority leader is Allison Clarkson. The minority leader will be Randy Brock. So it is a House filled with women now, for sure. I mean, all 4 money chairs are expected to remain women. So there's a lot of change, and a lot of it is female. The work environment, the legislature will continue to meet remotely for now. The House is meeting with groups to see how they can improve access. We had a meeting with Mitzi Johnson and Jill, and they were asking for input on how people could better communicate with legislators. The output, Lawrence Miller said this, the output is good, right? You can watch them on Zoom. We've all figured out how to speed them up, which is helpful, especially for some particularly slow talking legislators. But the input's difficult, right? It's really a challenge for people. And we found the Senate, many of us found the Senate to be more challenging than the House even. And, you know, you sit on the outside ordinarily, those of us who've been in there, and you catch the legislator's eye, and, you know, when you know they're going off track, and that'll get their attention. We can't do that now. We're all sitting here, you know, watching Zooms, and we text them, and that's, at least they're accessible by texting, but it is a real challenge in getting people's voices heard in the State House. So for 2021 legislative issues, others may disagree, and I would be really interested to hear if other people have a different opinion on this. I'm finding that the administration, being so busy with COVID issues, is not focused on really big new initiatives this year. They're still dealing, and that's all they want, they can be focused on. And so I don't see any bold initiatives yet coming from the administration. And I've heard similarly from the House and Senate, they're just trying to get their feet under them. But having said that, last session, while everything was supposed to be all things COVID only, they did manage to pass an ivory ban. So I do think people get things done when they want to get things done. So, you know, broadband continues to be an issue, access to high quality childcare, paid family leave. I've heard people talking about affordable housing as being something they want to deal with more. And of course, the budget, the education fund right now, you know, I don't think it'll end up this way, but they're talking about a 9-cent increase. So they're going to have to find out how to lower that, which leads you to taxing. Many people talk about expanding taxation to services, and they, you know, broaden the base. They can lower the rate and obfuscate some increases that way by new taxes, and cloud tax is always up. And I put Act 250 up there just because it's something that they're always talking about. They failed hugely this year on that, and I'm not sure if they're going to pick that up again and try and do anything. So that's my assessment. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but that's it. And I'd like to stop sharing my screen. There I go. There I am. So that's it.
Thank you, Patty.
You're welcome.
That's great. It'll be really interesting. Now we go to Matt Musgrave, one of my colleagues on the Public Policy Committee. Matt brings his background in real estate advocacy and association experience to help further Associated General Contractors of Vermont's mission and the interests of its members. Matt's going to help us understand how to navigate the legislative process during this Zoom age with the new normal, and texting legislators while they're sounds good to me. Take it away, Matt.
Well, thanks. So just, oh, my video just went weird. Okay. Wow, is my shirt psychedelic for you? Because it is for me on my end. So I've set my timer here because I can tend to go long, and if I do, please interrupt me. You can definitely kick me out or whatever. Patty alluded a little bit to what, I'm Matt Musgrave with Associated General Contractors. Patty alluded a little bit to one of the big topics that we're discussing here at AGC. We're discussing with the Chamber of Commerce, we're discussing with our other advocacy groups, is this level of engagement that we once enjoyed prior to COVID with our elected officials. Our jobs have changed significantly. And one of the things that drew me to this line of work is my desire to work in advocacy. But one of the things I really enjoyed about it, one of the fun parts of my job was the going to the State House and doing our in-person lobbying. And that's changed a lot. The way we used to connect, and without doing a full civics lesson here, the way our legislature works is bills are introduced, they're assigned to committees. The committees then vet the proposals, they make changes, they send them back to the floor where it may go to another committee or get voted out to the other side of the building. The committee structure is something that has been very powerful for advocates as well as members of the public to become involved with the process. And the beauty of us having an in-person State House is that we were able to visit these committee rooms, albeit some of them are very small and we can stand shoulder to shoulder at times in rooms that can approach 150 degrees. But our elected representatives through our open meeting laws would let us into those committees, whether it was an advocate like myself or a member of the public. The only way that we weren't allowed into those committee rooms was if we were violating some sort of a rule of the House. Maybe we had acted inappropriately. I haven't seen that yet with any of the advocates here, or any of the public, I should say, or bringing in signs or protests or being disruptive. There's a list of rules. As long as you're following them, you can come in and be a part of the process, meaning you're in the room as a spectator. One of the nice things, and having spoke with some chairs already about this change that we're dealing with, is now that we can't do this in-person scenario, they used to depend on having us on the sidelines, because sometimes they would get information or somebody would make a comment and the chair would look around the room sometimes for a subject matter expert or maybe a member of the public who may raise their hand, or there are some advocates that had mastered these looks that they would give that would trigger the chair to ask them if they had a comment. They've kind of lost that now, and on their end, they're feeling it a little bit, because now they're having to go out and look for the subject matter experts. But we're really feeling it here because, we don't necessarily have that opportunity that we once had. We had the committees that we could become face-to-face and have conversations. We used to meet in the hallway, or you could have a cup of coffee down in the lunchroom. As advocates, we held receptions. We did a lot of stuff on handshakes. But that's all changed now, and we're now in this remote environment. And there's a couple of ways that we can become involved in this remote environment. And first, I'll talk a little bit about what the I guess the lowest common denominator of what we're able to do at this point is. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And one of those places that we can go is to YouTube. So it took them a couple of months to get up and running, but at this point, the legislature is now meeting remotely over Zoom meetings, and they're projecting them out to YouTube. And they do a pretty good job of streaming them live. It's interesting, if you go on to YouTube and watch these videos, you can actually watch other people make comments. I don't think the legislators ever look at those, but you can see what the general comments are. And you can watch it just like you'd watch anything else on YouTube. It's pretty easy to find any one of the committees. I pulled, this is the Senate session. I'm not going to play it for you, but all you do is go to YouTube and search Vermont Senate, and it'll pull up there. They have their own channel. There's also, I pulled this up because a few of us that are presenting on the call are actually on the screen. This is the House Commerce Committee, where we do a lot of business for the business community. So it gives us the ability to go in and watch. Actually, this gives an opportunity that people didn't once have. Members of the public in the past weren't necessarily able to go and watch what happened in committee. If you're working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, you might not get to watch that, and you might not know that you can actually call up a committee assistant and get a digital copy of an audio file to listen to the committee. But now you can actually get out of work if you really want to go home and eat your dinner and watch us talk about unemployment insurance. You can do that over YouTube, and it's very effective. For a lot of advocates I've spoke to, it gives us the opportunity to watch things after the fact. We as human beings can't be in more than one place at the same time, which was a challenge for us in our advocacy when we were, we may have 2 or 3 different committee sessions we're running back and forth from. So it gives us the opportunity to go out and watch, but what this doesn't give us the opportunity to do is engage with our elected officials. And that's where we have to think outside of the box and look at how we're going to do that. And this year, at least here at AGC, we're talking about a lot more of a grassroots movement that we're going to have to employ to get to our elected representatives with our issues, with our desires, with our requests. They are meeting on Zoom, and one of the ways that you can become involved and go out and be involved with their Zoom meetings, similarly to the way that we are today, is you're able to contact the chair, or if, let's say, one of your reps was sitting on the committee, you may call your rep and say, hey, look, you're having a meeting on unemployment insurance today. I might have a comment or two, but would you let me be there? Because I may be able to answer some questions if you run into a challenge that we have. As Patty said, it's been amazingly easy over on the House side, and you'll oftentimes hear that the House side of the building is referred to as the policy side of the building, and that may be why we get a little bit more opportunity, but I would dare say that the opportunity is based on the fact that they're not countywide elected officials. They're folks that you're electing in your own town, and you may have a better shot of getting into one of those committees. But by and large, for the most part, what I've discovered with committee chairs is if you have a genuine bona fide interest in the topic, and you're not a troublemaker, I guess, they're more likely going to let you in if you proactively call them up and say, hey, look, I'd like to be there. I have a particular bent on this issue that you may find that you have a question for, at which point you can get involved with that. So that's how we're getting involved. And as Patty said, we've been meeting with leadership, trying to figure out a system that we best can do that as advocates, but also as the public. And certainly the press has some of the same feelings. It's this engagement factor where people can work behind closed doors and we can watch it afterwards. It kind of takes away that tap on the shoulder, meet you in the hallway, and get things done. So from a perspective of engagement, it's changed significantly. And what I can tell you is the best thing that you can do to become involved with that process and have them understand who you are is pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. I'm going to show you really quickly where, if you don't know where to find information on your elected representatives, you can do that here at the Vermont General Assembly website. I was fortunate enough to start my advocacy career after this website was designed. It's a fully functional website. It has just about everything that you would need, every link, every place that you would want to know information about what's going on in the State House. And like I said, one of the first things you need to know is who is your legislator. And they give you a pretty easy search engine here that you can do. If you live in Barrie, you can type in Barrie. You're going to get legislators that represent you here in Barrie. At which point, we know our Senator Ann Cummings. You can go in here. She publishes a number that you can reach her at. She's got an email that you can reach her at. But I can tell you as an advocate, that direct telephone call is going to get you answers a lot quicker than emails. It doesn't matter who it is out there. They know that if you pick up the call that you care about an issue, and they're likely going to call you back if they don't answer the phone. So other things that you could do here on the website, and I'm just checking my time here. I've got 10 seconds left. I'll speak quickly, is you can look up bills and how they work. So let's just, because I can remember the bill number, 688 is the Global Warming Solutions Act. And actually, it's a relevant bill because there's a lot of history behind it. You click bill or resolution. I happen to know the number, but you could type in a keyword like global warming or such. But I typed in 688 because I remember a lot of these bills off the top of my head. And you can see what happens here when you open up this page. You can go in, you can see how the bill is introduced, the different steps in the process. I'm not going to go through the whole legislative process, but you can see the history and the changes that have taken place in the bill. You're also able to go over to committee activity. You can see who's been in there and testified as a witness. You can see here, I may be down at the bottom of the list, but I did testify in the Global Warming Solutions Act, as did a lot of other folks that were in here. In addition to seeing the witnesses that were in, you're able to see maybe some of their testimony. And I think this would actually pull up some of my testimony, but I'm not going to go into it right now. It gives you the ability to see who's on that committee that's got this bill in their hands at the moment. And you can actually find that pretty easily by looking down here at the status. You can see the history of the bill, the votes of the bill, floor amendments that come in by clicking into the daily schedules. So this website is a fully featured website. It's very easy to use. You can find anybody that you need, any committee, anything that's out there. I mean, the amazing information that you can get from the Joint Fiscal Office, other documents that have been released for public information, is all within here. So with that said, knowing that we're running on a limited time basis, those are the two major things that I would tell you. Number one is that engagement factor. We're going to have to work a lot more in grassroots. Of course, us advocates will still be out there, but we're going to be calling on our membership to show up, make phone calls, because we're going to have to do something different. And then, of course, the website here, that's your go-to for information. If anyone ever runs into an issue with it or would like some help or needs to find something, feel free to give me a call here at the Associated General Contractors. I'll type my phone number into the chat box. But with that, I would say thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be a participant on this meeting with such a professional cast of advocates that are here today. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, feel free to give me a call here at the office.
Thank you, Matt. We have a question here from Kim. First, I just want to say, thank you for describing all this for us. We're in this situation now where it's like everything's more accessible and yet it's less communicative. It's this weird dichotomy. Good to know that phone calls are more effective than email, less passive, I guess. And also interesting that you're observing that legislators don't see comments in the streamed meetings. Maybe you could encourage them to look at those. From Kim to Matt, Kim wants to know, does the General Assembly site for bill search track written comment as well, or only calls and testimony?
So, number one, I don't think the legislators want to see the comments in the YouTube. They're not as civil as the ones that we make on the Zoom meetings. So to answer your question, yes and no. So if the public or an advocate was to pick up a phone and call a legislator or send an email to a legislator or have a private communication with a legislator, that's not a public record. It's not going to, arguably, it may be if you email their state account, arguably it could be, but it's not something that's posted on the website. The stuff that does get posted on the website for public consumption is professional testimony, and that's not necessarily from an advocate or a lobbyist, but if a member of the public, generally when you go to testify, you'll put something in writing so that they remember what you said. You put it in bullet points or you put it in letter form, so that they can when you leave, because all this stuff is going on all around them all the time, they forget stuff. So they like to have it in writing. When you submit something with your testimony in writing, that does go on the website.
So it's on us to provide the written document.
And again, you can send a committee something in writing and they may not necessarily post it. It's the actively testifying is what triggers that when they'll put your name up on the list.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
Next, we welcome Bill Driscoll, Vice President of Associated Industries of Vermont. Bill has provided legislative and regulatory advocacy for Vermont's manufacturing community for more than 19 years. He's taken a leadership role in the business community on issues ranging from unemployment compensation to chemical regulation to workforce development. Bill will discuss Gone Viral, how 2021 employment issues may impact the bottom line. Take it away, Bill.
All right, thanks, Stephanie, and thanks, everyone. Appreciate the chance to talk to you folks. It's going to be an interesting year coming up, I think, as Patty alluded to. I think it really is uncertain right now how deeply or widely the legislature might venture into any variety of substantive issues rather than sort of focusing on more strictly COVID-related things up front. But nevertheless, there's at least two major sort of employment or HR issues that are both tied to COVID, but also have a timing or a calendar trigger that I think will make them sort of issues that will come up front. The first one is involving the unemployment insurance system, and particularly for employers, the unemployment insurance taxes. I think, as folks may know, UI is sort of funded on a self-correcting, somewhat complicated but self-correcting system of tax rates. There is a target, sort of an adequacy target for where the trust fund should be that employers pay into. It's generally based on what your worst experience year for the last 10 years was, and we try to have a multiple of that in the bank. So employers pay UI taxes. There are about 21 rates or brackets in UI taxes, and depending on your experience with layoffs, that's where you pay in that schedule of 21 rates. But beyond that, there's actually different schedules. So you have those 21 brackets, but there are 5 schedules where that entire set of brackets will be lower or higher depending on where you're at. So Schedule 3 is supposed to bring in enough revenue to kind of maintain a steady state with the fund. If trust fund levels get too low, you go up. You could go as high as Schedule 5, which is the highest tax burden on employers. If the trust fund is flush, you can go down. You can go down to Schedule 1, which is the lowest. And so we're in a sort of a strange confluence of events here going into 2020 and now looking at 2021, where because we had not had a recession for so long, and we revamped our UI system in 2010 after the last recession, the trust fund was actually supercharged going into 2020. It was the highest probably it's been in a long time, over $500 million. And the system had been reacting to that as best can. We had gone down to Schedule 1, so we were sort of the lowest tax schedule for employers. And we also have, because the trust fund had been so high going into 2020, this January, we're actually scheduled for a reduction in the taxable wage base as well. That had increased to about the first 16,000 in wages. That's going to go down to 14,000, a little over 14,000 in January, because going into 2020, we had actually too much money in the trust fund. But now we have the COVID hit and the shutdown associated with that, which has had a devastating effect on the trust fund. It's not hard to imagine. I think we had an excess of 500 million going in. We're already down to half of that, and the year's not even over. So that's tremendous stress on the system. What that means, though, for employers is the sort of self-correcting mechanisms, which are a normal part of the system, are being put through an extraordinary stress and an extreme change, such that if nothing else changes, next July, the tax schedule that employers, what taxes are based on, is not going to change gradually to adjust to ebb and flow of the economy. It's going to be a radical change. It's going to go from all the way down to the bottom at Schedule 1, where we are now, all the way to the top to Schedule 5, because the trust fund has been depleted so much. And as a practical matter, what that means for employers, if you have a very good experience rating, so you're on the lower end of the brackets, your UI tax burden could more than triple in July. And if you have a relatively poor experience rating, so you're already paying relatively higher taxes, your rate could go up in excess of 60% or more. So that's a big hit, obviously. So seeing that coming, there were proposals in the House and from the administration to ease that a bit. Because employers always have to pay enough into the system to keep it solvent or adequate, eventually employers have to put in enough money. But you can change the rate at which that's done. And so there were proposals, rather than hit employers in the middle of next year with a significant tax increase in the UI system, to sort of to defer that impact and kind of ease into it a bit. And there was a proposal to hold that increase to not going all the way to Schedule 5, but to go to Schedule 3, which is still obviously an increase in tax burden, but it's not as sharp as a hit as it would be otherwise, or a shock to the system. As a practical matter, that means we may need to pay more for longer to still replenish the fund, but we don't have to do it as quickly and as sharply. However, that proposal did not get anywhere for a couple of reasons. One, it was brought very much at the last few days or week or days of the extended session, and there's still some uncertainty as to how much can we afford to put off tax increases and not risk bankrupting the fund, depending on how things go into the year. But there was also some politics about it as well, unfortunately. That it's going to be a much longer discussion than we have here this morning, but anything involving UI taxes is inevitably sucked into a fight about UI benefits as well. And there was sort of a last minute push from some folks that, well, we don't want to provide any relief to employers unless we also increase UI benefits by some sort of equivalent or corresponding amount. The problem with that is that there really isn't sort of a quid pro quo relationship. In other words, deferring tax increases on employers is not providing some sort of benefit that UI recipients are missing out on or being deprived of. They're still getting their benefits. Benefits have not been cut during this whole process like they were during the last recession when the system collapsed. If anything, the expanded eligibility have actually increased the support provided by the system, but employers are facing an incredible cost. But pushing over that sort of push and pull can not only did delay action this past summer, and it could potentially complicate efforts to try to provide relief this coming session. That's just going to be a fight that we're going to be having, very likely, surrounding this issue. The other issue, though, however, is uncertainty with the surge in cases that we're experiencing now. The Department of Labor and DFR, I think they're still interested in providing relief, but there's less certainty right now as to whether or not, once we get through this seasonal surge, hopefully in cases, is the trust fund going to be in worse shape than expected a month or two ago this coming year? And can we afford to put off that significant tax increase without risking the trust fund getting too low? And there's all sorts of negative implications for employers if the trust fund gets too low as well. So I think we're going to have to see where the trust fund is at in the beginning of the year. The department's going to be making an assessment. Is there enough in the fund where we feel we can get confidently through 2021 without going too low? And then if we have that sort of excess capacity, can we defer that tax increase on employers without getting into a fight about also increasing benefits, which ultimately actually just simply increases the amount of taxes employers are going to have to pay in the long run? So that's just going to be a big issue. Two related ones are because the ultimate target about how much taxes employers pay is based on maintaining a fund that can withstand the worst year in 10 years. 2020 it may not be a 1 in 100 year, but it's definitely not a normal recession impact on the trust fund. And if we are going to have to be paying taxes to prepare for a 2020 on the normal recession cycle, that's going to be a much higher tax burden for the UI trust fund than is reasonable. And so looking at fundamentally how do we calculate our targets for the fund is going to have to be revisited. It does not have to be revisited next year, and frankly, doing it in the heat of the moment, I think would be challenging, but before too long, we're going to have to reset how we actually calculate UI tax burdens going forward. Another timeliness issue is workers' compensation. There have been the whole question of compensability for COVID-19 as a workers' comp issue. Most systems, including Vermont's system, do have provisions that can accommodate illnesses that are truly workplace related. Obviously you have to prove connections and whatnot, and there's a process. But there's been a big push this year to allow presumptive coverage for workers' comp for COVID. So in other words, if you have COVID, how much of a presumption? You're just going to assume that you got it at the workplace and therefore make it a workers' comp issue. Clearly, that can be even though a lot of COVID cases are not necessarily intense in terms of medical costs and hopefully not terribly intense in terms of lost time, they can certainly add up if you end up sweeping a large percentage of COVID cases into the workers' comp system. So most states have not gone down that road, in no small part because, one, the difficulty of really assuming where you get COVID, but also, frankly, and this is a key issue for other things as well. If to the extent that we are all in our different sectors following our various guidance documents and guidance procedures for workplace safety and operations in this COVID environment, arguably the workplace is the least likely place where you're going to contract COVID-19. And so to have rules that assume that that's where you got it for workers' comp purposes is pretty flawed logically as well. That being said, Vermont did take steps toward introducing some rebuttable presumptions for COVID-19 coverage. The legislation that was passed provides a pretty strong presumption for certain frontline and high-risk occupations, a lot of the medical first responder fields that you might expect. For everybody else, though, while in theory it created a potential presumption, the defense against that presumption was as long as you are following state and federal guidelines for safe workplaces, you have that defense that a given COVID case is not a workers' comp case. So sort of two things on that. One, that legislation expired, that set of rules expires in January 15th. So we are obviously not going to be out of this whole situation by then. If anything, things are going to be worse. And so we're going to be re-litigating, so to speak, in the legislature, the question of workers' comp presumptions, workers' comp coverage for COVID-19 in the session. And that could be, again, a very challenging environment where, depending on sort of the politics of perception and emotion, you may see much stronger push for greater workers' comp coverage for COVID-19, which obviously could have a big impact on the cost of workers' comp premiums in Vermont. There's no guarantee right now which way that's going to go, but it's going to be an issue. I think that one, frankly, is calendar driven and less at the front of people's minds than the UI one, I think, because that sort of revisiting hasn't been discussed as much. So I think that sort of ties into sort of a larger theme, which I think is the other sort of overarching issue for employment issues or HR issues, which is getting back to, it is absolutely critical that all of us do everything we possibly can to make sure that our workplaces are following the safety guidance and the procedures, the PPE, the distancing, everything else. It is absolutely critical that we all maintain that discipline and that buy-in for that among employees and the workplace. It cuts across almost everything. In terms of shutting down, as if things get worse, it's pretty clear that the administration is not looking so much as essential or non-essential. They're looking at, can you operate safely? So the more work site-based outbreaks, if we have them, and to the extent that we do have them, that will definitely jeopardize whether your sector is at risk of being shut down, depending on how things go. It is also tied into, again, like I said, workers' comp. If protection against the presumption for workers' comp coverage is dependent on your ability to show that you are following the guidelines. There are various qualifications for UI. If somebody doesn't feel that your workplace is safe and they want to leave and collect UI, that is based on whether or not you are complying with workplace safety guidelines. There are also general liability issues that are being debated now at the federal level and may be kicked off to the state level that may play out in Vermont. And there's no question that compliance will be a fundamental tenet of that liability issue too. It really just pervades everything, both on its own, its obvious merits for all of our welfare, but also in terms of liabilities and costs. There are significant implications for employers if they don't have those policies in place and they're not keeping their employees bought in to doing that. Obviously, fatigue and other things like that are a constant issue and are never going to go away. And therefore, owners and managers need to be on top of that as well to try to push back on that. So those I think are the sort of two big issues in workers' comp and UI, and then the compliance with guidelines is sort of an overarching theme that touches on so many other things. There are going to be other issues. There may be a federal guidance from the EEOC about employers mandating vaccination issues to be coming up. Like I said, liability protections, both in terms of employees, but also customers and other issues. That's going to be an issue that plays out. One of the perennial issues in the last several bienniums or years in terms of mandatory paid sick leave. I think that's really going to, obviously there's going to be an appetite for that still with health being first and foremost. But there's going to be such a mix of federal things either happening or not happening, and cost impact issues and broadband in terms of bandwidth issues in terms of how much the legislature can handle. I don't know if paid sick leave is going to make it through all that clutter this first year at least. Certainly, I imagine by the end of next year we will have revisited that issue as well. Anyway, so hopefully that wasn't too much of a fire hose kind of presentation, but those are I think some of the main things to be looking out for.
Thank you so much, Bill. That's a lot to consider for sure. Any predictions on whether we might be mandating vaccines as an economic measure?
So what I was speaking to is what was the ability of employers to do it. So in other words, it would be your choice. And then, so the question is, how much authority do you as an employer have to require your employees to get vaccinated? I think there's a general consensus that you do have quite a bit of authority, but there are issues like much like other vaccination issues in terms of objections that folks might have. I think there are some questions that the equal opportunity employment folks need to make some opinions on to kind of define sort of the limits of employer authority. I think, frankly, that's probably be a good issue to revisit with some employment lawyers, especially if the EEOC does put out a ruling in the next week or two. Maybe revisiting it after that comes out would probably be helpful for folks. One other thing I'd throw out there, and we can follow up with links, but the state has begun a weekly call-in or a webinar with the health department and other departments for employer questions surrounding COVID. And that seems to be going pretty well so far. I think they've done it 2 or 3 times. It's going to be every Wednesday for an hour. And I think between a bunch of us, we can get those links out if you're not already aware of that and being able to follow that. That's good to get information, but also if you have employment or HR related questions, to raise them there too.
Great, thanks so much, Bill. If you want to get those to Kevin, we can send that out with the survey that we send after this. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. We are going to turn to Chuck Starro of Leonine Public Affairs. Chuck's a lawyer and lobbyist with extensive experience in energy utilities, telecommunications, environmental policy, insurance, and healthcare. Chuck brings us Arrested Development Act 250 in a political state.
Thank you, Daphne. Good morning, folks. My name is Chuck Storrow, and I'm a partner with Leonine Public Affairs in Montpelier. The Act 250 bill, H926, really started out with a report by a commission called the Commission on Act 250, the Next 50 Years. That commission was established in the previous legislative biennium and consisted of 6 legislators, including Representative Amy Sheldon, who chaired the commission. The commission issued a report on proposed changes to Act 250 in January of 2019. At the same time, Representative Sheldon then became chair of the House Natural Resources and Energy Committee, which has jurisdiction over Act 250 matters. And she, under her direction, the committee spent most of 2019 and half of 2020 sessions working on this issue. They developed a committee bill, which is a bill that is actually sponsored by a committee as a whole, as opposed to an individual legislator. And essentially, when it's introduced as a numbered bill, in this case H926, it's already been essentially passed by the committee. Previous to the introduction of H926, and this was sort of a function of the report, and then there was a lot of discussion about this in the committee, was the idea of changing the process such that the Natural Resources Board that exists now, which doesn't really have much adjudicatory authority over Act 250 matters, it's more sort of an administrative body, would actually take on the role of hearing appeals of Act 250 matters, and the district commissions, which currently hear the applications, would lose a lot of their authority and really only would be relegated to doing minor matters. That was very, very controversial. A lot of people pushed back on that. And so in the end, the bill that the committee produced did not provide for that. However, it did do a lot of different things that were controversial in a number of ways. One of the things that it did was clarified Act 250 jurisdiction over recreational trails. There'd been a lot of activity and rulings on that issue. Basically, what the committee's bill did was treat recreational trails similar to the way that highway projects are treated. It would apply jurisdiction based on the amount of disturbed land involved in a trail and associated things like parking lots, as opposed to the size of the underlying tract of land. Another controversial or significant thing that the bill would have done was create a new separate trigger for Act 250 jurisdiction over commercial projects within 2,000 feet of an interstate exit. The bill also resurrected an old jurisdictional trigger, the so-called road rule. Back in the 80s, the former Environmental Board promulgated a rule that provided for jurisdiction over a project based on the length of a driveway or roadway leading to the lot of land or within the lot of land. And under this proposal, a road of 2,000 feet or more would have triggered Act 250 jurisdiction, or a driveway. On the other hand, the bill, and this was a significant proposal, exempted Act 250 review for projects in designated downtowns, designated village centers, and neighborhood development areas, on the theory that we want growth in our downtowns, and usually there's processes in place in those areas that would adequately review those projects. That proposal created quite a bit of pushback from some environmental groups. It was supported by the Vermont Natural Resources Council, but it was opposed by others who argued that it would negatively impact water quality. The committee's bill also formalized what any good developer would do which is before you file your application, you talk to people, you talk to the relevant town authorities, planning commissions and so forth. So it created a formal pre-application process, much like what happens in energy projects or telecom projects that are reviewed by the Public Utilities Commission. Before you can file, you actually have to submit to the neighbors and to the Planning Commission and Select Board and have a conversation with them. The bill then also made a lot of substantive changes to the criteria that apply to Act 250 projects. These are the issues that are taken into consideration and the impacts from the projects on those issues. There was explicit language about whether or not a project creates greenhouse gas emissions. A big priority for the Vermont Natural Resources Council was language that addressed the impact of projects on large forest blocks of forest land and connecting wildlife habitat. There was one provision in there that kind of caught my eye as being interesting, which is under Act 250, you have to conform, your project has to be in conformity with a local or regional development plan. And the language in the bill basically said that doesn't apply if the particular provision in the plan is such that a person of average intelligence can't really figure it out, what it's trying to say. And, from my personal experience, that kind of resonates with me because generally speaking, municipal and regional plans are sort of all things for all people. Want to preserve the rural landscape by have a lot of economic development activity. And so sometimes they're written in planning speak and, you sort of scratch your head and saying, what are they actually trying to say here? It strengthened the presumption, the existing presumption in Act 250 that if you get a technical permit from the Department of Environmental Conservation, say, for instance, on wetlands or stormwater runoff, that you've complied with the relevant Act 250 criterion. That was strengthened. So all of that was worked out by the House Natural Resources Committee, basically over a session and a half. The bill came out of committee and went to the House floor just before the COVID emergency shut the State House down. It passed the House and then went over to the Senate. And at that time, the COVID emergency had hit. The legislature took a brief hiatus to figure out how to proceed going forward in a virtual fashion. So when they reconvened in April, the bill was in Senate Natural Resources Committee, and they had a hard time dealing with a 61-page bill that had impacted a lot of people. There were a lot of stakeholders who wanted to speak on that issue, on the bill. And as has been mentioned by other presenters, the virtual format was difficult. A lot of people were quite upset because unlike when you work in the State House on an in-person basis, you can go into the committee and you can, generally speaking, even if you're not a scheduled witness, you can provide input depending on the circumstances. You couldn't be in the committee in a virtual meeting unless you actually had the Zoom invitation, and you wouldn't get that unless you had asked in advance to be able to testify. So a lot of folks who were watching on YouTube were pretty frustrated because they couldn't provide their input. And there was quite a bit of consternation over all of that. But in the end, what the Senate did was boil the bill down to 9 pages. They signed off on what the House did on recreational trails and what they did on the changes to the Act 250 criteria regarding forest blocks and connecting wildlife habitat. And so then they passed that version of the bill and sent it back to the House. And by that time, we were into the September session. And, the House didn't have any ability really to meaningfully develop a counter proposal back to the Senate. Sometimes, bills will go back and forth between the two chambers until they can settle on something that both sides can agree to. And so what they did was just boil it down to those 9 pages, sent it back to the House. The House signed off on it, adopted it on the theory of something is better than nothing. And then they adjourned. Both chambers adjourned. The bill went to the governor, and because they did not, at this point, it was late September, sort of put on the books a possible veto override session. In other words, they adjourned without regard to the possibility that the governor might veto some bills and that they wouldn't have an opportunity to come back and vote on whether or not to override it. The governor did veto the bill, and they didn't have a mechanism in place to try to override it. I'm not sure if they would have been able to, given the controversy around the bill. So in the end, it kind of brings to mind, it makes me want to paraphrase Winston Churchill. Never have so many people work so long to accomplish so little. And in the end, they didn't accomplish anything. And depending on your perspective, that may be a good or a bad thing. And that's what I can tell you about the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chuck. So more to come on Act 250.
I think so. I mean, I don't think they're going to do anything like they did this last, really, 4 years. Spend the amount of time that they did. There will be bills on Act 250, but I would be surprised if a 91 odd page bill is put forth and moves forward.
All right, thank you so much.
Certainly.
I don't see any questions on that topic right this minute. So we will wrap it up with Matt, who represents the fuel industry as Executive Director of Vermont Fuel Dealers Association, a Vermont native, former journalist and school teacher. Matt volunteers his time on numerous boards and commissions. He's going to tell us about the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Transportation and Climate Initiative with veto sustained.
Thank you so much, Daphne. I appreciate it. And thank you all for listening, and happy to play cleanup here. I'll just talk briefly about Vermont's energy policy, and probably the buzzword that you've been hearing, even if you're not quite paying attention to Vermont energy policy, which is the Global Warming Solutions Act and the Climate Council, which is the signature environmental bill that was passed despite the governor's objections through a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate. And just to provide a little context about what it means and what's to come in the next 5 years or so, depending on what social media thread you're on, this is either the worst thing or the best thing to happen in Vermont. And I try to give a sober analysis, if I can, on the state of Vermont's energy policy, as much as a oil lobbyist can. But Vermont Fuel is a nonprofit trade association. We represent companies that sell heating oil, propane, kerosene, and companies that sell and install heating equipment. We don't own oil wells, we don't own oil rigs, we don't own refineries. The average fuel dealer in Vermont, they live where they work. They have 12 employees and 2,000 customers. And if you call the office, you're most likely going to talk to someone whose name is on the side of the truck and outside the building, or the person that's installing the equipment or hauling the hose and driving the truck. We also run a training center. We train over 1,000 oil and gas techs a year, plumbers, electricians, tank inspectors, and delivery drivers. That's part of what we do. And we're also partners with Aaron Sigrist at the Vermont Retail Grocers Association, representing convenience stores that also sell gasoline. And when you add it all up, we sell a lot of fuel here in Vermont. We sell about 600 million gallons of liquid fossil fuels every year. That's 300 million gallons of gasoline, that's 100 million gallons of propane, and 200 million gallons of distillate, which includes heating oil, kerosene, dyed diesel used in farm tractors, and diesel for highway vehicles and dump trucks and that type of thing. And the official energy policy of the state of Vermont, and it has been since 2011, nearly a decade now, is to eliminate all of those gallons, eliminate petroleum, virtually eliminate petroleum, which is the official energy policy of the state of Vermont. And that is a tall order when you consider 98% of the Vermont registered vehicles, the vehicles on the road today with green plates, all use gasoline or diesel fuel. When you consider that 98% of the buildings in Vermont rely on delivered fuels, including oil heat, kerosene, propane, natural gas delivered through a pipeline, coal or wood. Just 2% of Vermonters say that their primary heating source is electricity. But the goal is to remove this, the combustion that happens in Vermont homes when they heat up air or water through wood, oil, or gas, or the combustion that happens in their vehicle when they fill up with diesel fuel or gasoline. The idea is to transfer all of these BTUs, or most of them, I should say, into electricity. And while this is the official policy of the state of Vermont, it has been for over a decade, they haven't got there. They haven't made the progress which many hoped they would get to. So we have what's called the Global Warming Solutions Act. And this is what it does. It has already created a climate council of 23 individuals, although currently there's only 22 serving. There was a position for a fuel sector representative. However, that has been left vacant. Someone representing my industry, they decided not to fill that position after it was vacated. So what it does is it creates a climate council. Over the next 12 months, they'll develop a climate action plan. That climate action plan could include a number of things. And when it does, the Agency of Natural Resources will be required to enforce that plan. And they may have to go to the legislature and say, well, in order to really enact this plan, we need some money to fund it. And so the legislature may be asked to fund it. But the Agency of Natural Resources can enact the plan without essentially getting permission to do so. So what these 22, hopefully 23 individuals will be deciding over the next 12 months will be significant. And what could they do? One of the things is they could encourage Vermont or require Vermont to join regional compacts such as the Transportation Climate Initiative, which is essentially a tax or a cap on the amount of gallons major oil companies can sell into the region, and use those funds to finance electric car incentives or public transportation. They could recommend that the legislature pass a carbon fee or a tax to fund similar rebates or incentives to move to electric vehicles or electric heat. They could also contemplate what some cities are doing right now, is recommend that Act 250 or individual municipalities approve a ban on new construction using combustion from fossil fuels. They're considering it in Burlington. It's likely going to be a resolution for a charter change in March, which any new construction not have an oil or gas furnace or boiler in order to encourage people to use less. They could also follow the model of California and set an end date for when a car dealership can sell a new vehicle with an internal combustion engine, as a way of encouraging car dealers or requiring car dealers to sell electric vehicles and not gasoline or diesel powered equipment. So what happens if this doesn't happen, which is what everyone sort of wants to get to? So if the Climate Council suggests all sorts of measures that will reduce gasoline and diesel and heating oil, propane, and natural gas, and the Agency of Natural Resources under the current governor says, that's a step too far, we're not going to do it. Well, then at that point, then the government can be sued for not enacting a climate plan by June of 2022. However, if they do enact the climate plan, but it does not accomplish the goals, which is to reduce emissions by 26% by 2025, then the state of Vermont can also be sued for not putting in a stringent enough climate plan. Or at 2025, when they realize that these goals are in fact, these mandated goals are in fact too stringent and there's no way we could possibly meet it, they could rescind the law. So that's what's facing us with energy policy, which is create a regulatory scheme which will encourage people to use less gasoline, diesel fuel, heating oil, propane, and natural gas, to use more electricity. And if we don't achieve that, the state could be sued in order to enact more stringent regulations to achieve that. The problem is, of course, what's the ability for us to meet those emission reduction goals? Well, we change our heating systems about every 25 years. We change our cars every 10 years. So achieving these goals, which would require 26% reduction in emissions in the next 4 years, seems like a tough out. Even if you were to raise the tax on gasoline and diesel fuel, heating oil, and propane, even if you were to ban the sales of new burners, boilers, and furnaces that rely on fossil fuels, or cars that rely on gasoline, you still are in this position where people are going to have to make these choices absence the regulations because they can't take away the cars that we already own. They can't remove the burners, the tanks, the boilers, the furnaces that are currently providing heat. So you have this strange setup where in 4 years, we will absolutely have a lawsuit because these emission reduction targets will not be met. And perhaps that was the end goal of this regulation, of this law. But that's one of the things that we'll be talking about over the next 4 years.
Matt wants to know if you, Matt, can tell us about the Burlington proposal for an existing fossil fuel heating tax.
So yes, there's two ways to go about eliminating heating oil, propane, natural gas. One is to raise the tax, the carbon tax, in order to encourage people to use another source of heat. The other is to ban its installation in new construction. So we have something in Vermont called Dillon's Rules, which some of you, local government nerds might recognize, which is that cities and towns, municipalities cannot do anything without the express permission of the legislature. So that's why you see when you want a local option tax, you have to pass a charter change in order to enact it. And this is similar here. What the Burlington City Council will likely do is they'll ask for the voters to approve a charter change, which will allow them to either ban the installation of oil and gas burners, boilers, and furnaces, or to allow them to charge an impact fee, which would make it prohibitively expensive to install an oil or gas burner, boiler, or furnace in Burlington. And if the voters in the city of Burlington say, yes, we want to do that, the legislature says, okay, you can do that, and the governor signs it, or it's overridden, it vetoes it, it's overridden, then in fact, they'll be able to charge. They'll be either make two choices, either just to ban it in new construction or to allow it, but to charge a high fee for those that want to use oil or gas to heat their buildings. And if it happens in Burlington, of course, it could happen in other municipalities. They could ask for a similar charter change. We're seeing this in other communities with energy committees that see this as a way that they can reduce carbon emissions. You could also see it in reforms to Act 250. We have something called the Energy Stretch Code, which if you need Act 250 approval to build a development, you have to have a higher level of insulation than if you were to build on your own lot without going through Act 250. They could require the same type of restrictions if you wanted to choose to heat your home with fossil fuels by creating an impact fee or some other ban or requirement. You're seeing that with in local zoning where you're required to situate your house so that it's south-facing, so you can get the solar. You have an opportunity to have solar. You're also seeing it in climate policy, which is requiring new construction to be ready for electric car chargers, so they don't have to be retrofitted later. So whether it comes to zoning, whether it comes to outright bans or fees on oil and gas heating equipment, it's an effort to not only take over the carbon emission strategies, not only for the federal government, which is largely viewed as not doing anything, which is true, not only taking it from Montpelier, but to take it in the individual towns to make decisions on what you can build with fossil fuel equipment.
Thank you for that synopsis. I think with that, we have a couple of questions to the group, and there's still Patty's outstanding question about any thoughts on why Republicans did so well in the state, while also Joe Biden did so well. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, please let us know. Joe wants to know if there are any significant committee chair changes anticipated and who might be appointed. Do you want to take that, Patty, or?
Well, there will be in appropriations in the House because Kitty Toll has retired. People expect Mary Hooper, who's her vice chair, to take that place, although then sometimes there's some buzz about, not Mary Hooper. So that would be my guess. If I have my money to put, it would be Mary. But other than that, I don't see, I know some of the members expect some big changes, but I haven't heard anything. And like we've said, it's very difficult for us to catch the buzz when we're all just on Zoom meetings. I don't know if the others that spoke have any ideas about that. Chuck or Bill?
I think you're right, Patty. I don't think there'll be significant changes in committee chairmanships beyond appropriations. We understood that there was some thought of Representative Briglin, Tim Briglin, being chair of APROS, but that he was not interested in doing that.
Right.
And I think there's this, speaking and getting back to Act 250, I guess there's some question as to whether or not Amy Sheldon would continue to chair House Natural, but I don't know if there's been anything reliable that's come out about that or not. I don't know if Chuck or Matt or anybody has heard anything about that.
Not definitively, just the speculation that because of the sort of the failure of that bill that she might not get the chairmanship, but I don't have any specific information about that.
I know early on there was some question about whether there'd be some wholesale changes in the Senate, but that seems to have died down as well.
I think you tend to see that when there's a tight race for leadership for the pro tem or the speaker, because people are making their negotiations or, you support me and you put you on this committee or I'll make you chair. These weren't tight races for these two seats. Sarah Copeland-Hans's withdrew. She was running. There is talk about her she's the chair of the Climate Caucus, which has actually become pretty, has a strong voice, I would say, in the legislature. So there's talk about maybe she is, chair of a different committee where she can have more impact on that. But that's only rumor.
You heard it here first.
I do know that Senator-elect Keisha Ram is going to serve on Senate Natural Resources and Energy.
Great. And as we come into our final 10 minutes here, the last question is, are all committee records available somewhere online, or are some not available, such as Senate Transportation?
I knew you'd like that one.
Who's
So
this question for? No, I think for the most part, if you go back through the COVID era, you're going to go to YouTube to get the testimony and the videos. You're going to be able to see your witness lists and what they spoke about online. Prior to COVID, we still have folks that have been around longer than I do know when the website was created, but there has, at least the 5 years that I've been up at the State House, that's all been online. So your testimony, your written testimonies, the list of witnesses, the steps in the process are all there. But before COVID, you would actually, unless I'm mistaken, you'd actually have to contact a committee assistant to get an audio recording of the verbal testimony.
Yeah, I think that's one of the good things that's come out of this situation in terms of that ready availability of the video transcript of meetings. I think I've heard, I hadn't come across this myself personally, but I've heard from some others. Maybe Matt Musgrave, you might have brought this up, that or maybe it was Patty, there were some cases where, and I don't know the reasons, whatever the technical thing is between the interface between Zoom and YouTube, but the switch between the live streaming on YouTube and then keeping the video as an archive, some of those streams went missing and maybe came back like weeks or a month later. I don't know if that was a temporary learning curve thing or how significant that is, but certainly anything from this beginning. And I think one of the interesting questions is when we get back to normal in-person committee meetings, I think it would be good to see, even though it won't be the same grid format as this, but some sort of video stream and preservation of committee meetings afterwards too.
I think.
I was just
Go
going to
ahead,
add that it's surprising that as they're in their meeting, they forget. I think that people are watching where they're more aware, obviously, when you're in a committee and you see them, and they sometimes say things in these meetings that's quite surprising, and it's archived, right? So it's been very helpful. I know they're concerned about it. They've said that to me, but it's been helpful to us to take that clip and be able to send it to people. And And the transparency is far better, I think, in COVID times with this streaming live. And I would think that they wouldn't want to continue that once they get back to normal, but we'll all push for continued, as Bill is saying, for continued streaming like we've had since COVID.
Yeah, I was going to say it's on us to make note of the improvements and then to push for continuing those kinds of things. This is a huge opportunity for sure. I mean, in all sectors, we're thinking about that at Norwich, of course. What's working great in this virtual environment, and how are we going to proceed forward? So it's exciting. I have another question here from Kim to Matt. Do we have the workforce to support the Global Warming Solutions Act? I was interested about that too, workforce and technology. What is the projected workforce impact? With limited young people entering the trades, will we have enough people to service the new energy generating systems? What will it do to employment? What is the potential retraining cost in the initiative to keep young people in Vermont?
That's a great question. And frankly, I struggle with it all the time, especially running a school. And, yes, there'll be jobs in solar installations. Absolutely no question. There'll be jobs in weatherization. But there's going to be a transition. And even if we ban the internal combustion engine in 2025 or 2030 or whatever the date is, and then we ban the installation of new oil and gas heating equipment, there is going to be a long transition where we're going to still be selling this fuel. We'll still be servicing these tanks. We'll still be servicing these cars. And in the interim, it's going to be even more difficult to get a plumber on the phone than it is right now, especially in the rural areas of Vermont. We're going to see energy deserts where gasoline stations are going to close because they just don't have the volume anymore. We're going to see fewer and fewer heating oil and propane companies because they're not going to have as much volume anymore as well. And that's a good thing for some people. They see that as success. But if you still rely on a gasoline vehicle or a diesel truck, you still use heating oil and you can't afford to convert to electricity. The reality is this is going to hurt those that live in rural areas that have to drive long distances, that can't use an electric car, can't afford an electric car, and that still rely and will continue to rely on combustion. But it's hard to attract young people to say, hey, listen, you can make $25 an hour if you get your commercial driver's license and your hazmat endorsement and drive a truck. Hey, you can be a heat tech and make $30 an hour, or form your own business and charge $120 an hour. You can make more than lawyers do. It's hard to convince young people to do that when they're being told over and over again that this fuel will be extinct, that we are going to eliminate it. So they either believe that and run away, or they don't, and they might find a viable trade. But that's a hard sale that I have to make, and I do. I make it to high school kids and say, listen, there's a real opportunity here to make a good living and stay in Vermont if you can drive a truck or you're good with a wrench. But it's going to be a challenge, especially in our rural areas.
Thank you. I'm going to take this one last question before we wrap up, respecting everybody's time here. From Joe, what is the best way to follow floor sessions in the House and Senate? I guess that goes to Matt Musgrave.
So let me just clarify the question. So the best way to know what's happening, or the best way to watch it?
He says follow floor sessions, so I kind of assume watching. Give us a nod, Joe. I never know.
Well, so first and foremost, and I didn't go to this part of the website. If you go to the main page of the legislature website, there is actually a window that says House and there's a window that says Senate, and it'll give you the agenda for the day. Included within that agenda if it's a newly introduced bill, you'll have fresh new language that they'll look at on their agenda, and it'll also have the list of what's on the notice calendar for tomorrow. They have to give you notice for a bill that's coming onto the floor, so you'll know what's coming up tomorrow, so you'll know when to come in. So you get your schedule by going to the website, but to actually watch it, you would go to their YouTube channel. So you would go to YouTube and search Vermont House or Vermont Senate. They have their own channels. you can go as far, and the technology with YouTube is beyond my expertise, but I do believe that you can set up triggers within YouTube to notify you when a channel goes live. So there's a few different ways to do that. One, by scheduling in advance, following their calendar, or two, relying on the technology of YouTube.
Wonderful. So ask a millennial, in other words.
I missed it by 2 years, seriously.
So this has been really wonderful. Thank you so much to everyone for your interest and your participation. Thank you immensely to our presenters for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. My shameless plug, if you are not a member of the Chamber, please consider becoming one, and please consider joining us on the Public Policy Committee. You can join me, Joe Choquette, Ed Larson, and Matt Musgrave on that committee. Also, please keep an eye out for information about our upcoming annual meeting scheduled for Thursday, January 28th at 3 p.m. We will have a presentation on the impact of the pandemic on this economy. And lastly, we will be sending a short survey out. And Bill, I do want to include the links that you wanted to share in there as well in that communication. The survey is going to be 3 questions, I promise. And we would really appreciate it if you would fill it out for us so that we can know what we did well and improve on what we could improve on. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a great weekend. And it's so nice to meet you all. And you can find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. So
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.